You're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Jim Rogers. Jim is an incredibly accomplished man with a long list of accolades and achievements under his belt. He's a Principal Education Advisor at the Education Development Trust, a Senior Advisor for Independent Economics and the Director of his own education consultancy business, Kilmar Consultancy. With a Master's in Educational Research Methods and a Doctorate in Philosophy, it's clear to see why his career has him deep in the world of teacher training, leadership and change management. We could be having a multitude of different conversations with him, but today he's come to talk to us about the work he does with Nordic Schools, providing school visits between England and Denmark. I'm really excited to find out more about this, its purpose and what it looks like. So thanks for joining me today, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Hannah. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's so nice to have you here. And although we've got a specific focus for the podcast, I still would like to hear a bit about your background and kind of what's been your motivation for the work you've done over your very varied career. Like, how's your journey led you to where we are today?
So I've been thinking about this because obviously I had a little sight to the questions, and I thought I'd just pick out some bits of my journey that would be relevant, I think, to your audience. Otherwise, that introduction is a little bit embarrassing. It also makes me sound like one of the most boring people in the world. So I'll try and make it relevant.
Oh, I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention.
Not your fault. Not your fault. So probably like yourself and many of your listeners have got a sort of background in being outside. You know, I had a childhood adventuring and exploring. We talked about the Scouts and the Guides earlier. So I was in the Sea Scouts, so canoeing, sailing, climbing, mountaineering, all the great things you could do, particularly during the good old days when health and safety wasn't such a big thing. So my background growing up was always about being outdoors, and I think that's probably stayed with me throughout my career. So I did environmental science at Plymouth Uni, spent some years after Plymouth Uni sort of roaming around, climbing and cycling and trying to find a sense of purpose. I think probably still trying to find that. But I ended up working in a school in London called Paddock School for children with severe learning difficulties. And that year was like the most pivotal, I think, of my career. That's where I learnt about compassion, humility, love, relationships. You know, those kids were pretty amazing. And that led to a career in teaching. So I became a geography teacher. And I had a sort of first part of my proper career was as a secondary geography teacher, and highlights from that were teaching out in New Zealand. I was also an outdoor ed instructor out there. So I had, the best of both worlds, sort of teaching outside, snowboarding, mountaineering again, beach volleyball. I could still be there now.
That does sound quite amazing.
It was really good. Just again, good attitude towards risk, which we might talk about today, the importance of risk in sort of learning about yourself. So, and then took a group of kids out to India as well, to the Himalayas, to Kashmir, which was one of the last things I did before I left teaching and started working at Exeter University. So that was something that I really wanted to do as a geography teacher. And then taught at Exeter Uni on their PGCE program, and did my master's and my PhD, and tried, I think, I wasn't very good at school. So it was a bit like, can I actually do this academic bit? And again, that was really important for me, I think, in terms of how I've developed my thinking and that critical questioning of what we do and how we do it, and whether we always have to do the same thing, and how we use research well. So that was really formative. And also working with adults, that change from working with children to working with adults was pretty important, I think. And then since then, I've done lots of different things, more focused on things like school and business improvement, organizational culture, leadership development, that kind of work. So I've been in various sort of more system leadership roles, bigger roles, in different sort of organizations. And then 6 years ago, decided to set up a consultancy, timed it perfectly just before the pandemic. So it was an interesting time, but within that sort of process, it gave me that creative freedom to do some of the stuff that I really wanted to do, and to do things a little bit differently with schools and with teams of people. And part of that was exploring the Nordic countries, so Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland, partly from a personal interest, and then and also from an educational perspective. So I'd been out to schools in Sweden when I was at Exeter University, and then we'll talk about it in a minute, but a collaboration with a group in Copenhagen led to the formation of these visits that we do to Denmark, and then reciprocal visits back here to England. So yeah, that's where I am now. That's what I do now.
Nice. I like the whistle stop tour with the highlights. That was great. Thank you. So yeah, as you just mentioned, the reason why you kind of came up on my radar is because some of our colleagues from the Outdoors group, and specifically the Outdoors School, went with you to Denmark to visit some of the schools. So yeah, tell me about this, like what this is in a nutshell.
So in a nutshell, I think it's really important that we get lots of external perspective on what we do day to day. So trying to just kind of look beyond the headlines, look beyond the boundaries, look beyond the traditional ways of working, and explore what else is going on. And for me, part of that is around international education systems. I think trying to learn from other systems that do things a little bit different is really important. So again, I'm fortunate to have that place to be able to do that through my consultancy. And I think 7 or 8 years ago, I took a group out to Copenhagen on a Erasmus funded program. So pre-Brexit, I took a group out for a trust that I was working for. So teachers and school leaders. And we visited a couple of schools in Denmark through a partnership that I have with an organisation called the Nordic Schools, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail in a moment. But it was, at the time, there was a very specific focus because there has to be for Erasmus, but it was around curriculum, the curriculum offer in Denmark. It was around leadership, the sort of leadership challenges. And then within that was a strand around well-being. So we know Denmark's supposed to be the happiest country in the world. So what is it we can learn from our Danish friends and kind of bring that back into our practice here? And interestingly, that was kind of before the well-being thing kind of gathered lots of momentum during the pandemic. So that was the sort of the initial visit, and then we've just kept going with the visits, and the idea is to kind of immerse a group in Denmark, to visit schools, to talk to school leaders, to observe teaching, and to kind of reflect on what we do here and see what it is that we can learn from or reflect on, and sometimes even reinforce what we're doing well here. It's we can talk about it in more detail, but that was the sort of the idea in a nutshell. It's quite good because they have a slightly different term time, so we can go out in a half term from this country and they're in school, so it means that people can kind of bolt on a few extra days and do a bit of exploring and not have any cover costs and that kind of thing. So but mainly I do it because I really enjoy it. That's why I do it.
Yeah, so I was going to say about how did you get started, but like you've kind of covered that already. So I'll move on. So well, actually, I'll just quickly go back to it being Erasmus, because maybe some of our listeners won't know what the Erasmus program is. So it might just be useful if I just think that sometimes when I listen to a podcast, I think, I wish they'd told me what that was. So yeah, just quickly, what is, I know it's defunct now because we are no longer part of the EU. But what was Erasmus?
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see if any funding comes back. I know that it still exists in Europe, but if there's talk about having a new 18 to 30 visa, isn't there, in Europe? So I don't know if that might open up doors. But basically, it's a fund through the European Union that enables teachers to do kind of immersive, as we described, kind of an immersive overseas experience. It has to be very specific in terms of what the criteria is, the reasons for going, or whether it matches the Erasmus kind of framework. So you have to build in kind of opportunities to benchmark and measure the impact. So it's quite a tight kind of structure. It was many years ago now, but I remember, you go through lots of different stages to secure the funding, and then you still have to produce kind of impact reports afterwards and talk about what you did and how you did it and how it met your objectives. But it kind of oiled the wheels for that international collaboration in a way that I think we really miss out on now. So that's a really important fund that I think we miss in the education system.
Yeah, because I thought it was just for university students, but you were saying it's for teachers as well. It was.
Yeah. So I did two things. The first trip out to Sweden was Erasmus funded, and that's when I worked at Exeter University.
Yeah.
And then the second trip was the one I organised myself, which was for schools. Yeah, so schools could benefit from it. And I know that there's schools. It's quite interesting actually. I work with some schools in Plymouth that have a link with Spain and a couple of other countries. I can't remember which countries they are now. And that had started with Erasmus, and they've continued the partnership. So they continue to do the visits, but they find different ways to fund it. So it has some legacy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Yeah. I don't know why. I think I just thought it was. I know that I've heard university students when I was at uni talking about doing their Erasmus year overseas, but I hadn't realised it wasn't just for university students. So yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Good. So during people's time in Denmark with you, what do they actually do? What does a visit look like?
Well, I think I might just take a step back and just explain in a bit more detail kind of what underpins the visits, I think. Yes. And then I can explain what it's like when we're there. So we talked about what we can learn from each other and what I try and kind of frame these visits around. So for me, the wellbeing bit is really important. So part of this when people come is that they will work with people from other schools or other educational settings, other alternative provision settings, for example. So there's always a collaborative element, and I build that into a visit. So that includes, going to an old, very traditional Danish restaurant one evening. People are free to kind of do their own sightseeing, but we always do quite a lot socially together.
Yeah.
To build that collaborative learning, because they'll learn then from each other when they're doing the visit. So there's definitely a focus on well-being. There's a focus on nurture, because that underpins the Danish educational approach. And so we look at how schools create the systems and structures around how they nurture young people and what inclusion looks like in a Danish setting, which is just brilliant. And we can talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. The importance of play and the importance of nature and being outside. And I've got a particular interest in oracy and communication skills. It's one of the things I also sort of run. And so we kind of look at how they have approaches to a collaborative kind of curriculum offer. So that kind of frames a visit. And then again, I can't remember, about 8 years ago, I'd been invited to talk at a conference in Poole. And I was on the same billing as a group called the Nordic Schools. So a bit of a shout out here to a lady called Kate Curtis, who had invited us across to this conference.
Yeah.
And we were on the same billing, and I embarrassed myself by saying I just got back from Norway and I thought Norway was a great country. And these three very good looking Danish blokes with lovely hair and smartly dressed smiled politely at me and said, yes, that's very nice, but we're from Denmark. And that kind of started this sort of relationship. And we've kept in touch since. We've done quite a bit with each other, conferences, workshops, professional development. And then we work together on a lot of these visits. So they'll help with the connections with the schools out there. And equally, if they want to bring people over from Denmark, they'll come to me and I'll kind of secure places for them to visit here. So the Nordic schools, well, I'll give a link later, but they're worth looking at because they do some really interesting stuff around the Nordic teaching model. It's a framework that they use to help teachers develop kind of social competencies for teaching, which is very different to ours. So that's the kind of the background and the focus. So I take a group out there of a mishmash, primary, secondary, alternative provision, head teachers, TAs.
How big are the groups?
I don't take more than 20 people, and
Okay.
actually
Yeah, I hadn't realised
20s.
that they weren't all from the same school. That's great that they're from different
Yeah,
organisations.
yeah, and yeah, it's been really good actually. And we do a little bit before they go out in terms of like bringing them together online, doing some
Okay.
briefings, give them things to read and a couple of podcasts to listen to, and then we get everybody together. Everybody's got to find their own way out there. I meet them in Copenhagen,
Yeah.
and then what I try and do is get two schools, two. There's a the Danish education system is quite interesting, but they don't have academies. They do have a private education system, but that's kind of blended with the municipal or comprehensive education system.
Okay.
And they have a really interesting free school model out there that's worth looking at as well. But actually, their
Free
education
schools in
system,
the way that we used to have free schools before they
yeah,
kind of
so
didn't work.
yeah, but free schools at work.
That
So free
work.
schools,
Okay.
yeah, the kind of mix age groups. I went to one that had no leadership team, so it was run by teachers and parents.
Okay.
They mix the age groups of the kids. They teach kind of entrepreneurial skills,
Like a
critical
democratic
thinking,
school, kind of.
a bit like that. They're all a little bit
Okay.
different, but
Mm.
so it's interesting for me that they can run that model alongside the kind of state model and still get amazing outcomes.
Yeah.
However you want to measure those outcomes, I measure it by the kids that I meet and just how amazing they are at doing stuff, how creative they are and how switched on they are. But also in terms of international education measures like Pearls and Tim's and so on, Denmark scores well, so they're
What
doing
are
something
Pearls
right.
and Tims? Just a quick.
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Sorry.
So there are two or three international education measures that are conducted, I
Okay.
think, every 4 years. Some around things like English, maths, ICT skills, but it's one of the ways that governments kind of measure themselves against everybody else.
Okay.
And so you'll see some educational policy driven, for example, things like the Shanghai maths and looking at some of the stuff they're doing in Asia has been informed or influenced a little bit by those international measures because some of those countries outperform others. Finland's a good example as well, actually, as a country that's always scored very, very highly in those international measures. What I might do is I'll send you a link after this and you can share
Great.
it
We'll
with the
put it on the show
podcast to have a
notes.
look
Yeah.
at. Yeah, so don't test me on each one because I can't
No,
remember.
I won't. But they're acronyms, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, diverted
Um,
slightly.
so where was I? Yeah, so what was I talking about? I got Monday morning brain fog. So
No, it's right. We were talking. You were just about to start talking about what the visits actually look like, and then I kept interrupting with little questions. But you're saying that you identify two schools
yes,
in
that's right.
Denmark. Yeah.
Yes, so we go to two schools, and what I try and do is get a couple of schools in different parts of the city where there's a slightly different kind of social demography,
Okay.
And you get a little bit of contrast there in terms of
Yeah.
how they approach
Yes,
their
because you were
teaching.
saying about the free schools and how there's all the different types of schools there. So yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go to two different parts of the
Yeah.
city. Visits normally involve lots of walking, but we'll use the kind of the network of tubes and stuff to get there, or the metro to get there as well. Or the group this year, your friends took I can't remember what they're called now, but the equivalent of the Boris bikes and zoomed around Copenhagen on these rental electric bikes as well. But so we'll go to those schools, and then I'll talk about this in a moment, but there's a very different experience to how you arrive in a school. And the whole process of walking through a community to get to a school and then walking into a school when there's children in there and there's teachers working, that in itself is quite a powerful part of a visit. And then we'll have a welcome normally from the leadership team, always in their staff room, always in a really nice setting, and they have amazing pastries and they have amazing coffee and really nice, as you can imagine, kind of Scandi decor.
Yeah.
And you're just made to feel incredibly welcome. And
Amazing.
one of the things that always stands out for me is that leaders there don't define themselves by like educational performance measures or brags. Like they won't give you their equivalent to an Ofsted outcome or their exam results.
Yeah.
They'll talk about the school and the culture and the children and the communities and the parents and the teachers in a very holistic way. So that sometimes it's what they're not doing is as powerful as what they are doing when we visit, if you see what I mean. And I'll come back to that in a second. So, and then we'll spend a day or half a day in the school, visiting lessons, speaking with teachers and head teachers or school leaders, maybe taking part in some fun activities, usually there for lunch. And then I'll run a session with them in the afternoon where we do some sort of reflection. And this is the key. So this is one of the things, Hannah, that I think is really important. Right, it's really easy to go out to a place like that and start to compare and contrast what you're doing, and then thinking, we can't do it because we have an Ofsted inspection. We can't do it because we don't have any money. We can't do that because the kids would never cope. And so what I try and do is I try not to set this up too much, try not to tee it up too much before a visit. I want people to go out there very open-minded and just kind of absorb and reflect and let them do their own kind of learning at their own pace, rather than make it like a really strict, like I want to see these outcomes at the end of the visit, or I want to chase you up in 6 months to see what you've done differently. It won't work like that, because I think you'll then just try and pick out the differences. So it's always then really interesting to see what does happen with the learning afterwards and where it takes people. But I try not to frame that too much, because I think it's just important that people kind of immerse themselves and then do the reflections a bit later on. So normally a couple of visits. We always go to one of the two great restaurants in Copenhagen where they serve very traditional food and we get looked after. Bit of downtime, and then people come home, and that's a visit. And at the minute, so that's Denmark. At the minute, I'm in talks with Stavanger University in Norway, with a view to trying to do something similar in Norway and see if we can kind of combine the two in some way. Yeah.
Do you tend to go back to the same schools in Denmark? Like, I was just thinking about how do the kids react to like a bunch of like random people from England like turning up in their classes? Like, kind of what's it like?
We do and we don't. I don't have a fixed rule on that. So my friends Casper, they're all called Casper, in the Nordic Schools will normally help secure a couple of schools for this visit. And if we develop a relationship with the school leader, we'll tend to go back. But if that school leader leaves for whatever reason, that happens quite a lot in terms of, just personnel turnover. We might go somewhere new. So how do the kids react? So I think this is really interesting. I'll tell you a bit of an anecdote. So I remember the first time we went out there, I met the group off the plane. We went to the university. So they have this Carlsberg campus. Carlsberg's a really important part of the kind of social structure of Copenhagen. Where the workers' houses are and so on. So they put money into education in the university, and that's where all the teachers go and train.
Carlsberg's in the beer brand.
Yeah, Carlsberg in terms of beer. Yeah, so the history of Denmark's really interesting. Sort of pre and post war, as it's like had to find its identity away from mainland Germany. It's kind of social principles that have underpinned society and politics is worth exploring. And so the organizations like Lego, Carlsberg and so on, they put a lot back into society. You pay a lot of tax out there, but it's all about kind of social support, social development. So so I asked this teacher, what I already knew what everybody was looking for, but we had this quick chat, and she said to me, I'm really interested in focusing on break time, like playtime. And I was like, oh, what? She was from primary school. Why is that? And she said, well, our kids are really good during lessons, but at break time, they just go mental, and then we have loads of problems. The kids are always fighting and falling out with each other. And of course, I got some views on why that might be, but I didn't
Mm.
say anything. And then we did these visits. And if you were to kind of plot the energy levels of a school day in Denmark,
Yeah.
it's actually quite hard to see the difference between a lesson time and a break time. There's a kind of
Okay.
flow to the day, there's a calmness to the day, there's movement of kids, but they don't go mad at break time.
No.
And I was thinking about this over the weekend and how to kind of describe this. Children feel like children out there. They don't feel like they're trying to be adults or
Mm.
trying to be anything else. So there's a sort of innocence or
Mm.
a kind of an openness. Of course, they speak great English, so they've made that effort to speak our language. So
Yeah.
we're always very respectful of that, because that could be quite intimidating for teachers to talk to us in a second language. But the kids are very comfortable talking English as
Mm.
well. They're always super polite, not in a forced, artificial way, but you just
Yeah.
feel welcome. You
Genuinely.
just feel
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't think this teacher probably found what they were looking for in terms of how to manage a break time or a play time, because
Mm.
actually it's part of a bigger kind of
It's part of the
holistic
bigger issue.
approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. And this year we went to a school where we observed a little kind of short video clip of and it was in Danish, but it was subtitled in English. So there's quite a lot of us in this classroom, and the kids were watching. There's no uniform either, so they're all kind of wearing what they want to wear, watching this
Yeah.
video clip. And it was about this boy who found a gun and he either shot his friend or his dad or something. It was quite a hard hitting little video.
Mm.
And within it was a few F words in the subtitles and so on. And I remember the head teacher of the school, one of the schools I had, came up to me afterwards and he said, if I played that in one of my schools, we'd get complaints from parents for like a week afterwards.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was the kids were telling our teachers, actually what they're saying in the film in Danish is a lot worse than what you're reading in the subtitles. But there was no reaction. It wasn't
No,
like that was.
that wasn't the gasps that you
It
might
was
get.
no, it
Yeah.
wasn't controversial. They
Mm.
know how to behave in a social setting. They know
Yeah.
how to be polite. They know the rights and the wrongs of presenting yourself. And I think we'll talk about this in a moment, but that thing about trust is
Yeah.
really significant. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's what the visits look like. Uh, and yeah, to get to know people, outside of a UK setting, people can be a
Yeah.
bit relaxed. I kind of tend to spend a little bit of time with them outside the visits, and then I'll let them go and do their own thing quite a bit
Mm.
as well. But yeah, I absolutely love that element of the kind of social bit.
Yeah. They'll do 2 school trips during their time in Denmark, and then
Yeah,
some
usually, yeah,
reflective stuff with
yeah,
you and
yeah,
some
yeah,
sightseeing.
yeah.
Okay, cool. So a good mix.
Yeah, it's a good mix. Yeah, it's an easy place to get to, and it's an easy place to get around.
Mm.
And it's not a holiday, right? So this is quite important. The well-being bit for me is really important for everybody,
Yeah.
but it's not come on holiday with me. Like, they're 2 long days. Like, we work hard, and we
Yeah.
actually get them together the night before to do a briefing as well. So they're pretty knackered at the end of the couple of days, but
Yeah.
we pack it in, and then, like I said, people could stay on if they want to afterwards. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. So we've started to touch on it a little bit, but let's dive in. What is it about the school model and the Nordic school model that you think is so valuable for those in a different school system, like particularly over here, to experience? And what is it that you're hoping that those attending are going to take away with them back to the UK?
I think that's a really good question. And again, I thought about this and almost don't want to say too much for the reason I said earlier, because I don't want people going out there with high expectations, because
Yeah.
I want them to make their own learning. But I'll give you a kind of a flavour. So I think what the Danish education system do very well is that holistic development of a young person. And we talk about it a lot in England, but we also know that our education system understandably responds to the measures and the performance kind of expectations around what they do, particularly mainstream. And we're seeing at the minute what I would consider to be more and more exclusive practice. So the children that can't fit the mainstream model in this country are excluded from the system. And you can't blame schools for that, because they're measured against a set of performance indicators that is counter to being truly inclusive.
Yeah.
And if you're an inclusive leader or an inclusive CEO of a multi-academy trust, you've got to balance that against potentially having your normal measures being kind of compromised for that educational philosophy. Whereas in Denmark, it's at the heart of what they do. There's a moral imperative, but there's also, they have the skills and they have the community within the school around those children to kind of nurture them. So I think that's one of the things that I'm always keen that school leaders get to see, is how they do that, how they bring teams together around a student to share information and share what that student needs, that they can then put in the support that they need during the day. So that's one thing. We talk about the outdoors, we talk about play, that use of outdoor space where they've got space, but even if they're, you know, in a small urban school where there isn't a lot of space, but still getting kids outside, that kind of that opportunity to be indoors and outdoors. People are always surprised how many kids cycle to school. During the winter, they're cycling in the dark, in the rain, in the snow. They don't care. They just arrive, check their bike in a bike shed, and off to lesson they go.
Back on,
cycling city, right? And there's you can't blame the UK weather for not doing it. There are cycle lanes and so on, but I just think that there's that approach to just getting on with things that's quite important. The critical thinking and collaborative element of what they do in Denmark is also really interesting. Okay, so I believe, and I might be a bit old school, but that collaborative social learning is really important, both for staff and for the students. They do that really, really well.
I don't think that's old school.
Good.
I think I've had loads of conversations with people recently about how important collaboration is, like in all different spheres of things. I think it's I feel like more and more people are recognizing the value of working collaboratively or learning collaboratively than maybe they were a while ago, but I don't know.
Well, I think I won't get too political about it now, but
no,
I'm really interested.
That's another episode.
There's another, it could definitely be another episode. But I'm really interested in how we've evolved as a species. You know, how did we learn before schools were invented? You know, we learned through modelling, we learned through experience, we learned through that kind of immersive element of education, learning from our elders, but also learning with each other socially. That's why play is so important and being outside so important. So I think they do that really well in the Nordic countries, and that focus on relationships with students and with each other is really strong. So my friends at the Nordic schools and their Nordic teaching model I described earlier kind of breaks down those social competencies in a way that we don't really focus on here. So I think that that's an element of learning that we can get from a visit. They also have, so one of the things that is always a big surprise, I think, for our visitors is a tier of professional called the pedagogue. And the pedagogue
is like a pedagogy.
As in pedagogy.
Okay.
So as in how children learn. So a pedagogue has to go to pedagogue college and learn about how children learn and how to support learning, but they're not teachers. They're a bit like a super teaching assistant.
Oh, that's really interesting.
It's amazing. It's really amazing.
That's cool.
And they run after school activities. So they'll run sort of clubs after school as well, but they're there all day and they provide that nurture element around the students in a way that the teachers won't do so much of, but they're very much kind of embedded in the system. So, you know, we mentioned Carlsberg earlier, so I think I'm right in saying that all of the teachers in Denmark go to this one teacher training college, so you don't have this myriad of routes into teaching, and the pedagogues go to a pedagogue college, and if you meet a pedagogue, they're proud of being a pedagogue. That's their profession. That's what they do.
Yeah,
they don't want to be anything else. That's their thing. So that's always a big source of learning, I think, for our visitors, the people we take out there, and kind of learning a little bit from that and employing something similar. I know quite a few of the people that have come back have looked at doing something similar here in terms of their schools or colleges.
And
so yeah, I think there's go on.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Just on the pedagogy thing, in previous episodes we've talked about all sorts of, like, there are multiple I hate this word so much, but anyway, there are multiple pedagogies, aren't there? Like, and different approaches and stuff. So presumably at those colleges they're learning about everyone's different theories about how children learn, because everyone's got a different approach, and like, you can talk about I'm going to go big names like Montessori and Steiner, and then forest school based and all sorts of different ones. So presumably do they learn about all different types of philosophies?
I couldn't tell you in detail what their training looks like, but what I can say is that they have really good training around that student development, that aligns with the educational philosophy that underpins the Danish education system. That they are experts in that. So they're experts in how those children learn and how they play and the needs that they have, and they will create those opportunities, particularly after school, through kind of arts and music and sport and so on, but also during the school day and supporting the teachers. So one of the things that I do is, if I work in a school in this country, I'll try and do any professional development with teachers, with TAs as well, to get them talking the same language and thinking about the same thing. And that's kind of borrowed from that sort of
thing,
approach.
So it's like the Nordic school model is its own pedagogy now. Would you say?
I don't know. I don't. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. I think that they, and again, each of the 4 Nordic countries has a slightly different approach to this.
Okay.
But I think what I could say is that they draw from what we might say is best practice around child development.
Okay.
So we mentioned this. I'll mention it now. So we've just both had a weekend at 10 Tours. This immediately dates our podcast, right? So we're both back from 10 Tours this weekend, and we were talking about the introduction to the or the kind of the start line rallying speech from the army to the young kind of adventurers. And one of the things this guy said was about how Dartmoor won't bend to the convenience of the participants. And I made a note of that because I think what I see here in this country is that I think we bend education to our own convenience as professionals. And I think what they do in Denmark is different. I think they bend themselves to the students' needs more. Yeah. It's more bespoke. I've used the word holistic a couple of times, but there's more of that kind of nurture approach. So, for example, if a child's not ready to go through their final exams, they won't put them through the final exams. They don't try and get everybody to go through the exam exactly the same time. They'll wait until they're ready. They'll give them that support until they're ready to go through the exam. So that's a very, very different approach and a simple way to kind of explain the different ways of doing it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Awesome. So you've obviously been doing these visits for, do you say 7 years ago you started?
Yeah, I think we stopped during the pandemic, but
it's been a while now.
Yeah, we tried to do one a year, and we've had a couple of visits over from Danish as well. I should have said earlier as well, when I advertise for this stuff, we occasionally get people from overseas coming. So we've had interest from people in Holland, Belgium. We had a lovely lady from Greece join the group a couple of years ago. So it's not just for the English education leaders, but it's very much an international affair if we can make it so.
If we can make it so. Okay, amazing. And I do want to talk about you were saying about the reciprocal visits, but maybe we'll come back to that in a minute. So you've been running them for a while now, and any particular kind of standout memories or highlights that I know that you don't want to say too much about it in detail because of the people listening not necessarily having preconceptions, but any kind of standout memories that you'd like to share?
Well, apart from hurling ourselves into the harbour last autumn, but I think we might talk about that in a minute. So there's a couple of things that seem to happen every time we arrive, which is around when the penny drops about how they do things in
Yeah.
Denmark. I'm not going to say any more than that, but it often happens when we're not in one of the schools, but it's more of a kind of reflection on society and how they do things. And
Yeah.
it normally happens when we're traveling to a school in the train stations. But I'm not going to say any more than that. But
Okay.
there's always a moment, there's a tipping point, and somebody will say, I get it.
Yeah.
This is how. So that's always a magic moment. What I will say, it's probably the biggest shock to me the first time I went out there, is if you go to a school in this country. So through my work at Exeter Uni, I'm out in schools all the time.
Mm.
I have to take my DBS certificate with me. I have to take ID with me. I have to sign in on a touch screen, have my photo taken. I get locked in a kind of holding room between the
cell.
outside and the inside. I've normally try to park somewhere. There's never anywhere to park, but you go through the big kind of gates and the security gates and so on just to get your car in. And they don't use the car so much out there, but so there's a whole rigmarole of getting in and out of a school, which is all around safeguarding and safety, which I completely understand. And then you get into I'm going to sound really critical. I might not ever be allowed into another school again, but you normally sit somewhere where there's lots of certificates and lots of trophies and some brilliant student arts, and it's all very shiny. There'll be something on a logo, there'll be a screen, with some news on it. And then you go into the school, okay, and we can talk about the kind of different environments in the schools another time. But if you go to a school in Denmark, there's no fences, there's no reception normally. You don't normally sign in. The first time I went to a school out there, we wandered into that school. Casper took me in, and the head teacher wasn't around, so we just walked into the head teacher's office and left our bags in there and went for a wander around the school. And I kept saying to Casper, "Are we allowed to do this?
We're going to get in trouble, yeah.
Is this okay?" He's, yeah, it'll be fine. Yeah, so-and-so will be back in a minute. We'll meet him in a bit when he's back. Yeah, it's fine. And we went for a wander around the school. Never experienced anything like it. So there's no kind of glory wall. There's no, look how amazing we are. The last school we went to in the autumn last year, I'd not been to before, and Casper wasn't with me. So I got everybody to the place, but I didn't know how to find the head teacher. So you go in and you can't go to a reception because there isn't one.
There's no reception, yeah.
I just had to wander around until I saw somebody.
And then ask them.
What does that tell you about society and education and their approach to schools? It's not necessarily a safer country. They don't necessarily have lower safeguarding issues. It's just a very, very different approach.
But presumably they don't have a massively worse amount of safeguarding issues. That was really poorly worded, but they obviously still take their safeguarding seriously, but just have a different approach to it.
Yeah, just have a different approach. And that approach underpins everything that they do, which is empowering. And I think it brings status to the role. I think it brings I'm trying to avoid using the word, but I've already said it today, but there's a level of trust in the system that we don't have here. And I think that's so as an anecdote, that's a kind of it reflects part of the experience that you have when you go out there.
Does it, for some people, bring some sadness at the difference between the systems? Like in the reflection, is sadness something that comes up for people thinking about how different the two systems are? Because I think that would make me sad. Like if I was working in a school over here, and I think I'd think, oh God, I wish we could be more like that. But
yeah, so this is why I said what I said earlier about trying to encourage people to not compare and contrast.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to do that. And so that you feel disempowered, and that's not what I want from the visit. No. So you could quite easily feel like that. But what's always interesting for me is to see what people do when they come back that's inspired by that experience. Yeah. There's always ways of doing things differently.
Yeah.
And particularly because I kind of focus on taking leaders out there, it's trying to empower leaders to lead.
Know what change they can make.
Yeah. So schools are still held to account over there for their performance. I know Ofsted is a big focus at the minute in terms of the Ofsted review, but I believe we should be held to account for spending public money. We should be held to account for the quality of the provision. It's just that we need to look at what those measures are and how we check for that. And it's slightly different out there, and that gives them that kind of freedom to behave the way they do. But it's much more deep rooted in society. So yeah, you might feel sad, but I haven't met anybody come back feel disempowered and sad about stuff.
No. I just thought there might be a moment. But then you can take that and turn it into something actionable.
Yeah, so that's my job, is to try and craft it in a way so that people feel empowered and not disempowered. I think, I mean, we all want to live and teach out there, right? So you always go back and think, oh, I wonder if there's a way of doing it. But, you know, and I know people have asked me how to do that. But yeah, I think that people tend to come back with more ideas about what they can do.
Yeah, okay, amazing. So does your work with these trips and with the Nordic schools that you mentioned earlier tie into your work with your teacher training at the University of Exeter?
A little bit. It's definitely informed quite a bit of work that I've done with schools. Schools, because I only do a little bit back at Exeter at the minute just to help out on the programme there, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it's been interesting if I've presented the Nordic teaching model to schools and multi-academy trusts, how they've used that. A group in Taunton have used it to as part of a review of their performance management. So they'll use that instead of setting targets as a way to enable kind of self-reflection and then lead to kind of developmental coaching approach. So that's been really interesting. With the trainees, I talk about it with the trainees at Exeter University. And actually one of the activities I'm going to be doing this week with them is to show them the Nordic teaching model and get them to reflect on where they're at now, sort of 3/4 of the way through the PGCE, on how they developed other parts of their teaching practice that isn't the teaching standards and it isn't the early career framework statements. It's the ITT framework statements. It's social competencies. How are you building relationships with students and across students in your class? How are you building relationships with colleagues? You know, it's those kind of things that are really useful kind of reflection points during the year. So yeah, it comes into it. I think probably also just because I talk about this all the time, they probably get bored with it, but it informs my approach with them, getting them outside as well. Like we take them up to Dartmoor. I'm really keen that they don't see the classroom as the only place to teach, but they understand that there's a classroom outside as well. So,
amazing. Okay, cool. This isn't a question I already gave you, I'm afraid, so you'll have to just answer on the spot. But just wanted, before we moved on a bit, to talk about the reciprocal visits. What is it the same if staff from Denmark schools, Danish schools? So it's that Monday brain fog, isn't it? If staff from Danish schools are coming over, what is their experience similar coming to visit the UK schools? Kind of, how does it, what's the purpose of that kind of reciprocal nature of it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Is their experience similar? It depends on the group and how they want to set it up. So the last group that wanted to come over wanted to be in London. Okay. So I had to source some schools, and we worked with a trust called EACT, who very kindly allowed their staff to visit schools in London. What was interesting for me was it was one school. It was a kind of an FE college, and they brought almost all of their staff over. I can't remember how many there were now. It was something like 60 staff.
Oh, okay, that's a lot.
So they funded it themselves. It was huge. So logistically, and of course, when they arrived, the day that they were supposed to go out to the schools, we had a tube strike. And it was one of the hardest things that I think Casper and I tried to organise. So what they had an experience. So one of the things that really struck them, I think, was how ordered and how supported the staff were around behaviour management. So some of the things that worry me a little bit around things like compliance and very sort of top-down behaviour management strategies in schools, actually they were really impressed by that and felt that they could learn a lot about those systems and structures that they could apply. I think they found behavior management harder and harder in Denmark. So that's that, things like that, and just some of the things that we take for granted. In fact, some of us might be a bit concerned about, but how ordered everything was, how smart the kids were, how systems and processes were being applied to a teaching model, they were super impressed by. So there is big differences, I think, between
that's really
the
interesting,
approaches.
isn't it?
Yeah. And again, we couldn't write that for them. They had to go and experience
They had to
that.
experience it for themselves.
Yeah, but with that group, because there were so many of them, I think they went to 10 schools.
Oh, really? That's
So bringing them back and then getting them to share their learning across those schools. I actually ended up going out to Copenhagen to run a session with them
afterwards.
In their college afterwards, to get them to kind of pull together the key learning. So yeah, I mean, so the visits are quite different, and they're not at the minute what we're not doing, but what we'd like to do is to bring teachers from the schools that we visit over here. So one of the things I'm looking at is whether we can start to do that and then also do it 3-way with Norway, because they'd quite like to go to Norway as well, and whether we could do something across the 3 countries. So the visits are different, but always really interesting.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I guess because I was thinking, and this is just my perception of it, like, obviously I'm putting a value judgment on the system in Denmark being, I'm using inverted commas, better. So yeah, it's interesting to hear about the things that they found that they could learn from our schools.
I think the first time we brought schools over, or teachers over from Denmark, was when we ran teaching schools, which is something that I got involved in a lot. And I think how we use research, when we use research well, is really good. I think how we build in sort of systematic collaboration across schools or educational settings, I think there's a lot that we do very, very well that I think is world leading. But we don't always see it. So we
like to focus on the negative, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And to have somebody else come in and tell us, that's really, really useful. I think that's really refreshing to kind of get that perspective, and it reminds you of the stuff you do well.
I think sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees, can you?
It's complex.
That's a really, really useful kind of thought point. And actually, I think that kind of, you could translate that to outside of this, couldn't you? In lots of areas of life. Like someone said to me once, like with kids and your kids' development, they're like, sometimes you get so caught up in like the current challenge your child is facing that you forget to acknowledge the things that they're doing really well at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's this idea of kind of self-improvement and improvement of everything that we, in one way, it's brilliant, isn't it? That we want to, as a trait, as a species, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn and improve what we do all of the time. But it has unintended consequences, I think, and I think that has issues around well-being for some people. That you don't feel like you're good enough, and I think and you have a kind of deficit mindset, and I think it's the same for education systems. What's great is when Casper and the team first came over here to talk to teachers here, they'd tell our teachers how well we were doing on those international measures. And we don't get told that. Our politicians won't tell us that. Our education ministers don't tell us that. All the information's there. It's all at your fingertips, but we don't go looking for it. So to have somebody from Denmark come over and say, do you realise, you're here on the
you're doing this well,
table of this measure, I think that's always good to see. So although we're always thinking that everyone else is better than us, I think there are things that we do well. And there are.
Nice. Oh, I'm glad I poked at that a bit. So we mentioned this very briefly earlier, but when I spoke to one of our directors, Chev, there's a car alarm going outside my window. So apologies for anyone that can hear that in the background.
I can't hear it from here.
You can't hear it? Oh, great. When I spoke to Chev, he mentioned about wild swimming. He said you've got to talk to him about wild swimming and the wild swimming he did with you when they were there. So I just thought I'd give you a little chance to talk about swimming.
Well, I think so when we do these visits, normally we're out in Denmark at the end of October, just as the clocks change. And if you've not been to Copenhagen, it's a beautiful city, and in the city is a kind of network of the harbour, basically, of waterways through the city. And there are some designated swimming areas. There's one actually just off the coast that's a wooden kind of snail-shaped structure that you walk out on these boardwalks, and it's designed to protect you from the wind, but you still go and jump in the sea. So wild swimming in Denmark, just like cycling in the snow, is a thing.
It's what everyone does.
It's not everyone, but it's popular. I met a couple of elderly women in this helical structure that I walked out to, and I didn't have my swimming stuff. In fact, I'd had a swim that morning, so I was just out for a little bit of wander, and I went and had a chat with them, and they were telling me about the winter where like the sea froze, and they said it was the best swimming experience that they had, like jumping into the slush.
Wow.
Oh my word. Yeah. So I'm saying this because when we took Chev and the team out last year, I can't remember whose idea it was, but somebody asked if they could go for a swim before we went out to do the school visits, which involved getting up in the dark and walking through Copenhagen to the harbour side and jumping into the sea. And I can tell you, it's, without swearing, it is cold. It is really cold. And what really impressed me this year, or last year when we did this, was the number of people who said that they were going to do it, who turned up and swam.
Amazing.
Even if they'd had a bit of a night out the night before, they were still there in the morning. Chev has got some of the most spectacular underpants that you've ever seen. I'm not going to say any more than that, but he was in the water. He looked like I don't know, some life-saving device bobbing around with his high-vis pants on. But so yeah, and it to me it really set the kind of I don't know, there was a chemistry with the group last year that I just thought was brilliant.
Yeah.
So we had people from different schools, different settings coming down in the morning for that swim.
Nice.
It was awesome. I'm going to confess that on the last morning, I jumped in and I had a proper whitey moment. I thought I was going to pass out. I've never experienced it in the water before. I had to get out and compose myself and then get back in again. So yeah, I'm one of those people that enjoys all year round jumping in the river or jumping in the sea.
It's not a mandatory part of the visits.
It's not mandatory.
People do often do it.
You can opt out. It's probably not legal. There's no health and safety check. It's on everybody's heads. They pass out.
Yeah,
that's bloody awesome. Yeah,
amazing, excellent. Before we wrap up, because I'm very aware that we are almost at the end of your time, is there anything else you wanted to say that we haven't covered?
Not really, and I don't. This might sound like self-promotion, but if people are interested, if they listen to this and they're interested, find me on.
I was going to say
LinkedIn.
that.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, okay.
And if I can, or my website.
I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I think there's a link. If I can get the trip to Norway off the ground, I know there's lots of interest for that, but I'm actually not going to run one this autumn for various reasons, but I'm going to put something together for 2026.
Nice.
So yeah, I don't think there's anything else, but just get in touch and we make it work. I keep the costs really low.
Yeah.
People pay their own way to get there. So it's just good fun. I'm going to take this moment to mention Oracy as well. So I mentioned it briefly earlier, but I've been running Oracy programs now for nearly 10 years across the country. And I think from the stuff that we talked about today, one of the key things is how language and communication skills are developed for young people. Denmark don't talk about the impact of the pandemic, and we're still talking about it. We're still experiencing it in schools. And I think that we have a system that has not allowed communication skills to be developed fully enough. I think it's going to be part of the new curriculum review in some way, woven into it by the sound of it. Schools are beginning to realise that or not just schools, but education settings are beginning to realise that it's something that they can focus on. And in my experience, things like social and emotional mental health and speech, communication, and language needs. So dealing with those complex needs, dealing with trauma, oracy is at the heart of that. So that's something that we've been running now for myself and a colleague in Exeter, Dr. Laura Kersey. We've been running sort of oracy programs. So if people are interested in that, again, get in touch, because I think it's really important.
Okay.
But yeah, nothing else to add.
Amazing. Well, maybe we'll have you back to talk about some of these other things as well.
Yeah. I'd love to. Yeah.
Because there are so many questions. I was like, no, don't ask that, Han, because it's totally off topic. So I'll have to do another one in the next season.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know how busy you are.
It's been a pleasure, Hannah.
You're welcome. So I've been wrapping up by asking everyone these three quick questions so we can just fire through them. And my first one is, how do you relax?
Well, it's going to sound cliched now, isn't it? I'll go and jump in some cold water and immerse myself in a bit of nature. And like, joking aside, I think it's fundamental to our species well-being to be outside. So it would involve a walk in a wood somewhere, or swim in the sea, a surf. I ride motorbikes. I like riding motorbikes. Find it good for mindfulness, cycling, anything like that.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's how I relax.
Amazing. And what are you reading or listening to right now?
I'm one of those annoying people that will pick up a book and read a bit of it and then read another bit and then another bit. But I've actually got two books here that I am partway through, and both of them are very relevant, I think. So there's a book by Robert McFarlane called The Wild Places.
Okay.
And it is he goes and I like to bivvy out on the moor and on the beach and stuff. And this guy goes out and explores wild places of Britain. He bivvies out. He spends a night or two immersed in an environment where there's a lot of history as well, where the place has got a story. So it could be up a tree, it could be on an island, and I've learned a lot about some of the wild places of Britain through that book. So that's a good book.
Amazing.
And the other one is an awesome book, and it's called True North: Travels in Arctic Europe by this guy, Gavin Francis. And he's a doctor, and he doesn't talk about the medical side of what he does, but he uses travels through the northern part of Europe, linking kind of history and landscape as a bit of a counter to some of the more extreme medical work that he's done, out in places like sub-Saharan Africa. And I've learned a lot. It's really inspired me actually to go and visit some more places, like the Faroe Islands and so on, in kind of Arctic Europe. I think it's a part of the world that a lot of people turn away from, and they head to Spain or they head to France. But I'm finding that book really interesting. So that's what I'm reading.
Amazing. And finally, why is being outdoors important to you?
I have these moments. I haven't rehearsed this bit actually. I have these moments. I've got two dogs, right?
Yeah.
Every time we go for a walk, dogs are ready at the door. They're hopping up and down. They're waiting to get out the door and go, whilst I'm fanning around trying to find my coat, put my boots on and so on. And I just think that as a species, it's a bit like what I said earlier about kind of bending the world to make it convenient for us. I think that we've become far too disconnected and sanitized from the outdoor environment in what we wear and how we approach protecting ourselves from it. One of the best experiences I had was living in a shipping container with an outdoor shower and a toilet that was 2 fields away, whilst doing a senior role for a multi-academy trust.
Amazing.
And it allowed me to kind of reconnect each day with me and the world around me, and kind of gave me a bit of balance to a stressful kind of pressured job. So for me, it's about balance. I think it's about remembering who we are.
Amazing. Lush. Great answer. Thanks so much for your time today, Jim. I've really, really enjoyed chatting to you.
Thanks, Hannah. I've loved it. Yeah. Hopefully see you again.
Yeah, hopefully. A massive thank you to Jim for taking some time out of his busy schedule to come and talk to us about the school trips that he does to Denmark and his work with Nordic Schools and a whole lot else. I really enjoyed the conversation. I found it really interesting, and I hope that those of you listening find it useful and enjoyable to listen to as well. If you did, as always, please do rate the podcast, subscribe to it, share it with all your friends, and do all the things that mean that more people can find us. We'll be back in a fortnight with another episode, but until then, thanks for listening.